Larry Spotted Crowman, I am honored to join you today as we consider how to rethink Thanksgiving. Your book, which I have right here, The Mourning Road to Thanksgiving, is the perfect platform to allow us to dive deeply into this conversation. As you well know better than I, Thanksgiving is a holiday that's meaningful to many. This was for a really long time an important holiday to me. And while there is historic information about Thanksgiving, it's also surrounded by many narratives, true and false, and many of these narratives full of harm. Personally, Larry, I'm deeply grateful to you for opening the door to today's conversation. It's one I've wanted to have with my own family, my kids, and now in this 400th year since the colonization of Massachusetts, I felt the urge to connect on this with my children even more deeply. Can you tell us just a little bit more about your book so that those who are listening and who would like to learn more, they can pick up the book and help frame our conversation?
So The Mourning Road to Thanksgiving is a contemporary story of a 40-year-old Nipmuc man. He's really suffering from things that happened to him in the past. And he's very bitter about America's favorite holiday, Thanksgiving. So he believes that he can heal himself and his community by ending Thanksgiving altogether. So he goes on this very arduous journey that is sometimes funny, sometimes sad. And we learn a lot about Native people as we go along the journey with Nipa. That's the character's name, Nipa Stone Turtle. And we get to learn quite a bit about not only Native people in contemporary times, but Native American history, how Native Americans have endured through the last 400 years, right? And so, wherever I travel, I get people asking me about Thanksgiving and the history of it. And so today we know quite a bit about the Pilgrims when they arrived. We're in the throes of the 400th year celebration, and so we know quite a bit about the descendants and what happened to all of them. But we know very little about what happened to the Native people. There's very little mention of their names and their places. And so this story opens it up as to that, where are they now, kind of a story underscoring that. And you get to learn about how Native Americans today traverse that history, that narrative that left them out, how they deal with the social constructs of their identity being on the periphery of our society.
If you could, and I think this would be really helpful because the book does it masterfully, could you just share a brief history of the holiday of Thanksgiving? Just so
Absolutely.
that we're on the foundation of facts.
So, and I'm glad you brought that up, Joe, because it's a historical fiction book. But what I did was lay the table, as it were. I gave a historical background when I opened up the book. So everything that opens up the story to help to set the framework of people of understanding the context of Indigenous people, because as we know, we still have a problem with understanding who Native people are. This is why we continue to fight mascots and appropriation, because people just don't know. And so the book opens up with a historical background of the history that you're going to delve into. And so the story of Thanksgiving is very different. The facts are very different than what we've been told about this harmonious situation where natives and Europeans were sitting around the table. And, so none of that happened. That's what we know. We don't know a whole lot about that incident, but we know that did not happen. So when the 102 weak and weary pilgrims landed, they were starving near death, barely could survive. And one of the first things they did was go and rob some Native American graves just to kind of feed themselves. And one of our grand sachems, Massasoit, also called Omasequin, he had an eye on them and was watching them for a while. But by the time the pilgrims had landed, there were already two devastating waves of disease, because people need to understand, before 1620, there were Europeans coming here for at least a century. Cabot and different Champlain and many others had been here prior to the pilgrims landing. And so they weren't staying, but what they were leaving behind was diseases, measles, tuberculosis, smallpox. And by the time the pilgrims had landed, our population here on the East Coast had already been wiped out, 80 to 90% of our people. So you can already just kind of think about what that means in terms of your community, your family. Everybody was losing somebody. And so this caused a fundamental shift in how we were going to survive. So Massasoit, observing these pilgrims, he decided to see if he can ally with these folks and see if he can, bring them together into the fold, and we can all kind of do this together and make a better way for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so he did that. We know of this ceremonial Thanksgiving dinner that we call. And so what actually happened was one of the things that the English did early on, they did these kind of drill formations where they would march and shoot off their muskets, kind of like what the military does today. And so the indigenous people had no idea what was going on. They've never seen anything like that before, where people would just essentially waste bullets to kind of show off their prowess in that sense. And so, and they had already formed this allyship. So when they heard all this shooting, Massasoit and 90 of his warriors came to rushing out and see what's going on with these pilgrims. And when they realized there was nothing wrong, they caught some deer and joined the feast. And that's kind of how it summed up. And to just go a little deeper into that, what people need to understand is that there was no real togetherness because I call this the first segregated meal in America, because you got to keep in mind that the English were just coming through the Crusades and all the different things of the Pura de Sangre, where they were really persecuting people for their religious. And I mean, that was the whole reason why these pilgrims came here, for religious freedom. So there's a lot of persecution around religion. So now imagine they're seeing these brown people with paint and feathers on. And so they were definitely afraid of that, they were bewitched and full of demons and all this other stuff. So they were very careful to keep their women and children away. So we envisioned the dinner with the natives on one side and the whites on the other. And so that's how that first dinner took place. Now, fast forward a little bit to 1637. 1637 is when the first official day of Thanksgiving was proclaimed in the United States. And that was after the English had massacred, burned alive 300 men, women, and children in Mystic Fort at Pequot. So that is where the first Thanksgiving comes from. And they wrote about that. And I have a little bit of that here in my opening historical background, where they talk about how, I'll have that, show you that right here. Then, in 1637, the English, with the aid of allied Indians, led an assault on the Pequot Mystic Fort. They surrounded the village and set it ablaze. Hundreds of men, women, and children were burned alive. Governor William Bradford of Plymouth described the event, quote, "It was a fearful sight to see them thus frying in the fryer, and the streams of blood quenching the same. And the horrible was the stench and the scent thereof. But the victory seemed sweet, for our sacrifice for the Puritans gave our prayers thereof to our God, and had wrought so wonderfully for us, thus to enclose our enemies in their hands, giving us so speedy a victory over such proud insulting of an enemy." William Bradford, end quote. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the first Thanksgiving was proclaimed.
And you know, if I could just jump in, Larry, what you've just described from the moment the Pilgrims landed all the way through that massacre creates such a different narrative than many, including myself, are taught in school. And so if we just go back to your book now, to this fourth grade student, the main character, Nimpa, and he's fourth grade, and this teacher wants him to, quote, play an Indian in their traditional Thanksgiving celebration, if you will. And he doesn't want to do this, right? He's resisting. And I'm just struck by the intensity and the hurt that you bring to the surface about growing up as a Nipmuc child amid these falsities, these lies, this racism, in a society that has little or no respect for Native people. And you talk, then we see when Nimpa comes back at 40, he's still carrying the trauma that stems from this, in the book, this fourth grade encounter with this very brutal teacher, and the mockery and what he has to endure as he stands up to her, and what happens in his family. And so me personally, when I read that, I think it's up to people, white people like me, to better grasp the nuances and complexities of growing up Native, to own the continued racism in our midst. So I just want to thank you for making that connection between that fourth grade character, or the character's fourth grade self, and then the character who we see today in the book. And I just wonder if you would tell us something of your own personal experience of growing up, and how you reconciled living in the present and acknowledging the dissonance and the lies and the racism in our midst.
Yes, absolutely. So the book opens up, as Joe mentioned, with the school scene, and Nipa is being forced to dress up and play Indian, and you also mentioned that historical trauma, that generational trauma, which is real and present in many Native communities today that we still go through. And so that what I described there was essentially a lot of my childhood there. And I've often talked quite a bit about. I grew up in the '70s and '80s, and that was probably the worst time in my life going to school, because I talked extensively about sitting in class and the teachers telling me I don't exist anymore, and hearing all the wonderful things and accomplishments in history class and never hear one Native person mentioned. And you begin to feel that you are just a hapless bystander benefiting from white proximity, that the people you come from have nothing to contribute, nothing to add to the betterment of the world. And so when I wrote this book, I had all these things in mind, but and as I said, it was very important to me to really kind of put all this together in a story where people can just kind of be the observers and watch how this unfolds, and spend a week with a Native American family in New England and see what they go through, and kind of like really internalize that emotive incidences that they can just understand themselves.
Yeah, I just want to really thank you for putting so much of your own self into the book, because I think
Yes.
it's a gift to someone like me, a reader, because it's as you say, this book is trying to understand the impact of generational trauma on first a little boy and then a young man, and the way in which that generational trauma is carried by the main character, and also people around that main character. And in reading the book, I was really struck by the vast array of perspectives and feelings that you illustrated, not only Nimpa, but so many other characters. I think it's easy sometimes for non-Native people like me to think that Native people may all think one way about Thanksgiving, but your book dispels that myth. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind reading a few different examples of characters' feelings about Thanksgiving, so that you bring the complexity of this book into this conversation.
Sure. For example, the main character's sister, so Nipa's on this, and the book was aptly named Mourning, Road to Thanksgiving. Nipa's on this journey coming back to his Nipmuc reservation to end Thanksgiving, and his first goal was to convince his sister Kina to join on board and help this fight. Now, they were raised in the same household. They both had parents that grew up with the American Indian movement, but Kina had taken on a different path. So she's a registered nurse. She has a house. She's married, and she's raising her family. She recognizes that she's Native, but she's not interested in trying to end Thanksgiving. She just wants to live her life. Yeah, I'm Indian, but that's about as far as it goes for her. And then you have her husband George, and so and as Joe you mentioned, there's so much going on in the book. George is also a Nipmuc, but he doesn't get the acceptance of Nimpa because he looks like a white person on the outside. So the book kind of shows you that lateral aggression within Native circles, and so it's a very interesting. George could also be a main character. Wavy could also be a main character. So I was really excited about having George in there and kind of share how he feels as a white-looking Native person not being accepted by his own people. And you kind of go along that journey with George. And then there's his ostentatious cousin Wavy. I really love Wavy. Wavy he's this really happy-go-lucky guy. He just wants to smoke pot. Every other thing he's speaking in like movie talk. He thinks he's in the movies. He has this very grandiose sense of himself, but he's really masking his severe pain that gets revealed in the story. He's really funny. So, and he doesn't care one way about Thanksgiving. He just wants to get high, chase girls, and you see these different characters play out and kind of relate to how they dealt with this generational trauma, how they dealt with the color of their skin, how they dealt with being a Native person or not being accepted. But also, I didn't want to just stop there. There's a scene when they're in Worcester and they're at this pool hall, and you have these they get into this argument with a couple of white patrons, and And these guys are stating their case of why they feel the Indians are getting free stuff, and they, you know, they're kind of going into this racist rant, but to them, they're making a very strong case of why they feel the way they do. And so people may see themselves in that conversation. And so, and it's very interesting. I just allowed that story to kind of open up in that sense. You know, and as I was talking earlier before we came on, this book took me 4 years to write, and when I was gifted the name Kankanto Chokesechek, the Crow is the storyteller and the dreamer, and he travels between those different realms. And as I worked on this book over the years, all the different characters, they kind of took over. I would just ask them, what do you want to say? Where do you want to go? What are you going to do now? You know, and it really, if that makes any kind of sense, and this is what came out of that, and I'm just really thrilled that I could be the medium to bring this to light, because it was just I could have never like cognitively thought of what came out of this, because it was just that inspiration of the moment. And again, everybody's sharing their own point of view about Thanksgiving, so people will be surprised that it's not just some linear one kind of projection on people's views, and it really opens up to many surprises. Absolutely. And having said that, Joe, you really illustrated the pain and the sadness that captures some of the story. And so what I wanted to do as a writer, I love to laugh, I love to be funny, and so you're going to see some absolutely hilarious parts in there of the book to kind of balance that, be the buffer between these two chasms there that you may fall into when hearing some of these sad stories.
Actually, you know, I had a question prepared to ask you about why you chose fiction as a medium to write this history, in a sense, and to write a journey and incorporate all these multiple perspectives. But you've just answered that, which is really, it's quite amazing that you allowed this history to come through characters who will let us laugh, let us mourn, let us get angry through them, and it's a vehicle for us to have this conversation.
Yes, absolutely. And what's interesting is that if you know, I'm very fortunate to have this book been widely read thus far, and when I go to different Native communities and talk to tribal people, they know these people, right? They know these characters. They've talked to them. They've seen them just with different names, right? So it was really capturing the spiritual essence of our community, of our sadness, of our laughter, and kind of letting the world see that and come along that journey with us.
Larry, can I ask you, what's your current narrative of Thanksgiving? You know, as someone who's written The Mourning Road to Thanksgiving, as someone who's thought deeply about this and spoken deeply about this, what's your current narrative?
So being Nipmuc people of the freshwater here in central Massachusetts, I've been asked this before, and so we have, and that's another thing that we should talk about, is that this celebration was something that was done for eons here, and we call it the Harvest Moon. Mm-hmm. And so we do get together, we have a feast, we gather to celebrate and do gifts of giveaways and so on. My view, particularly for the commercialization of what Thanksgiving has become, is I would say not very fond in that sense, because I think, and the book has a passage where Nimpa says, what's wrong with people just coming together and enjoying a meal and family? And even that now today seems to be getting lost, even amongst the mainstream, where before you can gobble down the turkey, they're already worried about, they got one foot out the door to get the Black Friday. So, and so it's disheartening to see that, but the idea of people coming together and hugging grandpas and grandmas and laughing, that is just a beautiful thing. And I think everybody needs to get back to that. But at the same time, learn the history of where this story comes from, and make effective change to help heal the wounds of our past, of our nation. I think that's a very important, because all of us here, you know, there's a very important movement in terms of land acknowledgement. And so everywhere we go, we're on Indian land. Somebody was removed and hurt for the benefit of somebody else to be there today. And those descendants are still here. And so it's not in abstract, you know, so we need to try to keep that in mind.
Absolutely. Thank you. And actually, if I could take us back to the book just for a second, and to the character of Healing Otter.
Yes.
Who, boy, has unbelievable wisdom and grace. I'm wondering if you could talk about the passage. It's on page 142, where he talks about our common humanity. It actually goes back to what you're saying, the true possibility for Thanksgiving, with people coming together and recognizing connection. And Healing Otter says it in a way that's just breathtaking.
Absolutely. So so setting this passage up here. So Nipa has gone through many changes by now in the book, and he's gone to his elder healing otter and try to seek affirmation and support in terms of ending Thanksgiving and just kind of getting rid of all the white people. And he's, he's kind of still bitter, and he's still trying to get affirmation. He just got through asking healing otter, how do we get rid of them and all that and so on. And so now here's healing otter replying to some of those comments. No, no, my son, don't miss the point. As I told you, Manitou, the Great Spirit, came to our ancestors long ago and taught us how to be in harmony with all life, to share and to teach our young and to protect our old. Our ways don't change because some others have chosen an evil path. And then Nimpa replies, but haven't you seen it for yourself? These whites come in, exploit the culture, and make up crack just for their stupid Thanksgiving? Healing Otter replies, it is still the same, my son. We cannot behave in an ill way because we fear others will do it too. We cannot walk away or stop because some may choose to abuse what freely has been shared. If we do such things, then we cheat ourselves and our culture, and then become that which we wish to destroy. Mm. And it went on a little bit, Healing Otter went on. Any human being who has walked the path of hate and bitterness only corrodes from the inside. I am much older than you, Nipa, and have seen many, many things, heard many stories from those who have passed long ago. And I am very aware of the cruelty and wickedness that human beings can do to one another. But following them down that path will only make us become a reflection of the darkness we wish to defeat.
Yeah, the wisdom and the grace embodied in this, that we don't want to become, he's asking Nimpa not to become what is not the right way forward. We don't want to become those people. And I thought to myself, okay, so if Healing Otter is saying this through Nimpa to the reader, what's my responsibility as the reader? I'm really aware that white people, and again, I'm owning this as a white woman, we do almost nothing to seek forgiveness or repair harm or offer generosity, which is what Healing Otter is talking about. And I'm reminded in reading this passage, the gauntlet you throw down to white people to do the work that Healing Otter is asking Nimpa to do. And I'm thinking about Thanksgiving and the transformation you're calling us to, and to recognize the basis of it and the lies and the falsities that have been built on that, and then the promise, if you will, of community that you're talking about. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us now about the ways in which white people can rise to the level of what Healing Otter is saying in this book. What can we do as people today experiencing this holiday? What's our role? What's our work?
I believe, yes, and thank you for that. It's about acknowledgement. I think that's the key: acknowledgement, and make meaningful gestures for change. And that's a big question. I'm really glad you asked that, because a lot of this book was written because of the fact that we have one America, but with two stories. And as a storyteller, I ironically share this because we're living within two stories, because we have one story of discovered lands, exceptionalism, God's chosen people, but then you have another story of the lived and shared experience of genocide, stolen lands, boarding schools, enslavement, and on it goes. And so these two stories are as far apart as a crow from the moon. And so how do we bring them together? And the indigenous leader from Canada, George Erasmus, once said, where there is no common memory, community cannot be formed. So America has no common memory. So a lot about what this book is trying to do is create a common present. Because there's no common memory, because people have not had access to the truth about the history that many are suffering. So an indigenous person or another person of color makes these complaints or makes a call for justice, people are very confused and don't understand, well, things are pretty good, aren't they? Because they haven't been told the true history. They can't see the pain. One of the most poorly narratives that have been told are about Native people. And this book, a lot of the reasons I wrote this book is to dispel that and to kind of get that voice out there. And as you said, it's doing so much in only 200 pages. Again, I'm really blessed to be able to do that. So the call for non-Native people is to read this book, number one, and to have open dialogue about race, about identity, about history. And the changes will kind of, I don't want to say spontaneous happen, but knowledge is a powerful tool. Knowledge saved my life. Learning about my ancestors, learning that we are somebody, saved my life. And it's saving Native Americans' lives all over the country, realizing they're not nobody. They do come from something important, something valuable. Here in Massachusetts, between 2014 and 2016, we lost 24 Native American youth to either overdose or suicide. And this tragedy needs to end. And a lot of that has to do with the story that we're getting in the schools. And so a book like The Mourning Road to Thanksgiving is making a fundamental shift in that narrative. And it's a call for whites and allies to join in this fight to help make that change. And I tell you, growing up in the 70s and 80s, I couldn't even imagine having a conversation with a senator about the crap I went through as a kid because nobody wanted to listen. So I applaud the changes that are coming, but there's so much more work to be done.
Absolutely. Here in Massachusetts, there's a Native American agenda that is seeking to right the wrongs, to begin to right the wrongs visited upon Native people in the Commonwealth. And it has numbers of points, and you touched on them earlier, right? We've got to rid ourselves of Native mascots so that we're not belittling Native culture and symbols as a sports mascot. We have to change the state's flag and seal. And there's a whole articulation thanks to the leaders of the Native agenda. And there's work for everybody to do that stems from listening that you're calling us to.
Absolutely.
And
it's right. And it's funny you say that because this book in 200 pages, you're spending 1 week with a Native person in New England, and you see them confront all these things just in their daily lives. I don't want to give away too much, but they're at the game and they're seeing the tomahawk chop and it was cringeworthy experiences that they were going through, and you're seeing it all within a week's time of what Native people have to endure in this marginalized society that they have to live with. And right. So it's thank you.
No, thank you. I want to get us to the day of mourning at Plymouth. And just talk about this, if you can, for us, set the scene for what happens as Nimpa brings all of the book home to this day. Both his relationship with Kina and George, his relationship with Wavy, what he learned from healing Otter. Talk to us about what happens when he goes to Plymouth.
So in Plymouth, as many are aware, or some may not be aware, that since 1970, there's been a National Day of Mourning started by Wamsuta Frank James. And this is Thanksgiving has been underscored as the symbol of genocide and enslavement for many indigenous people throughout the country. And so there's a day of mourning each year at Plymouth. And so Wavy's Nimpa, he goes there on that day to kind of give a speech. Now, keep in mind, this is near the end of the book. Now, Nimpa's gone through many changes, and I won't say what they were, but he's come to a very different place than what he did in the middle of the book and at the beginning.
He says, "So I say this to you, the United States of America. You said you're a nation of laws. We say stop breaking your own laws when it comes to Native Americans." I mean, that's one of the pieces of that passage at 178 that just jumps right out to me, the hypocrisy.
Absolutely. And it's really striking because when people think about Native Americans in terms of, well, they're looking for this and that, it's essentially asking the Native America to uphold their laws that they passed, right. Their trust responsibility, the treaties that they passed, that they signed. For example, I'm in my traditional homeland, Webster, as we say, Webster. Webster is, you could say we're under occupation in a sense because this was usurped by Massachusetts in 1888. Now, there was the Non-Intercourse Act passed by the federal government in 1790, I believe, says that no state can takes land or trade with Native people without the consent of the United States government. And Massachusetts did that. So that's just one law right there that was by federal law violated, that we scratch our head and say, well, how were they able to get away with this? And so again, when it comes to indigenous laws, there's a lot of fast and loose there applications that you could say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you've given us so much in this one 30 minutes together, and then in this exquisite book. So much truth telling, so much righting historic wrongs, so much possibility and transformation if we help stop the lies, help work for justice, help abide our existing laws. Larry, you gave us all through this book a tremendous gift. It feels like I won't ever go back to Thanksgiving again with the same approach for me and my family and those I love. You gave me hope for the first time that we could, as a Massachusetts community, as a United States community, transform this holiday built on so many lives, really go back to the core teachings that you put forward in the book. I'm wondering if you would leave us with a story from your book, which is one of my favorites, the story of the fierce warrior and the brave little girl.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
It's I have it on page 137.
Okay. Oh, yes. So here's a story that they're at the sacred fire, and Healing Otter is about to share this story. Healing Otter took a brief pause as he smiled and gazed to the fire. I want to tell you what my grandfather told me about the bravest coward in the world. He told me long ago there was this very fierce warrior, and he just loved to fight and show off how brave he was. He would go off in the woods and pick fights with the biggest mountain lion he could find, and then chase him down. He would chase down a pack of wolves and by his lonesome, and he wouldn't leave them alone until he made them all cry. And after that, he wouldn't be done. He even wrestled down the angriest bears in all these parts. Well, early one morning, as the fierce warrior was preparing his next hunt, he tripped over the pot in the longhouse, spilling all the deer stew. That afternoon, everyone went hungry. After much inquiry, nobody knew who knocked over the soup except one young girl who was up early that morning and witnessed this incident. That evening, the little girl said to the warrior, "Why didn't you tell the people it was you that spilled the soup?" The embarrassed warrior put his head down in shame and said, "I was afraid to admit I was wrong and made a mistake." The story always reminds me, Healing Otter said, of that brave little girl, he chuckled. Healing Otter looked around the circle and said, "Sometimes, my people, the hardest thing to do is to say we are wrong or made a mistake. But just as the sun has returned, so can hope and another chance to grow. Have peace and love for all."
May we all embody the bravery of that little girl. Thank you for bringing that story forward through this book, and thank you so much for the Mourning Road to Thanksgiving, this gorgeous, gorgeous piece of work that really is a transformative piece of fiction and so much more than fiction.
Thank you.
Larry Spotted Crowman, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Joe, for your time, and wishing you all well out there in this troubled time, everybody. Thank you.
Yes.